Leesmeyer is supposed to be chairing. All right, good morning. I wanted to get this thing started. Call the meeting to order. Let's start with Pledge of Allegiance given by Mr. Ingram.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. And welcome back, everyone. It's been a little while since we've met. I wanted to first start by welcoming back our board member, Mike Gardner, representing City of Riverside. He's been absent for a little while. It sounds like there was some restructuring going on, and glad to have the folks back in the hot seat. So anyway, congratulations on pulling the short straw. Let's see here. Let's start with the roll call. I think we're going to skip the formal system because we have a bunch of new members here today that haven't maybe been trained on the system. So we're just going to do voice votes today, if you don't mind.
Certainly. City of Corona. Here. City of Hemet. Here. City of Lake Elsinore. City of Menifee. City of Moreno Valley.
Here.
City of Murrieta.
Present.
City of Paris.
Here.
City of Riverside. Here. City of Temecula.
Here.
City of Wildemar.
Awesome.
County of Riverside.
Here.
Thank you, sir. That concludes roll call, and we do have quorum.
All right, great. Do we have any public comment?
I have no requests.
No request to speak. Are you sure? All right. All right, so then we have the consent calendar. All items listed under the consent calendar and policy calendar may be enacted by one motion. Prior to the motion to consider any action by the board, any public comments on the consent and policy items will be heard. There's no separate action unless members of the board request specific items be removed from the consent and policy calendar.
Move to approve. Second.
All right.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Thank you, sir.
Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, that was easy. All right, moving on. Item number 6, reports. I was getting Ms. Hester, if you could provide a status update on Stevens kangaroo rat recovery efforts.
Good morning, and I'm Princess Hester. I'm your Administrative Services Officer for the rchca, and I'm presenting today an update on our Stevens kangaroo rat recovery efforts. And so at our May meeting, board approved us to go to Washington, D.C. to meet with our congressional leaders to discuss Stevens kangaroo rat recovery efforts. And we took that as an opportunity for us to introduce our agency to our congressional members. We had not been to DC before. And so there was rchca staff along with our executive director, and Dr. Ron represented the rchca. In my opinion, it was very successful. This was the first time that we've gone to DC, and I think it was very influential for us to introduce who we are, where we are, and what it is that we're doing. So we talked about some of the challenges that we have with delisting. We talked about our success that we've had here in Western Riverside, and we talked about our desire to open up the discussion to work with San Diego and to deal with some of the challenges that they're having in regards to SKR recovery. It was a very productive time. We met with about 8 different offices. We met with local representatives such as Ken Calvert, such as Senator Feinstein, and one of the most productive, I think, meetings that we had was with the Assistant Director for Fish and Wildlife Service. That was Gary Frazier, and he has a direct connection to our offices here in Carlsbad, and he vowed to assist us in getting some recovery funding together to be able to support our efforts for delisting. So when we return from DC, I have been having regular meetings with Fish and Wildlife at the Carlsbad office. One of the challenges that they have now is that their focus has been changed. They are mandated now to go back and take a look at all of those plans that are not in draft recovery form and that have not been finalized. For our plan, we are in draft recovery, and our plan was in draft since 1997. And one of the requests that we made was to have them finalize the information in that draft recovery plan, and let's make it an active plan. We have been working on it, and we have been moving towards completing those tasks over the past 20 years, and we want them to now finalize that plan and say, this is it, and now let's move forward and show how we've checked off those boxes. But when their mandate changed to look at plans that are not in draft recovery, but for those plans that have no formal adoption at all, and also to look at plans that they're potentially reclassifying, it kind of took the effort away from the project that we're working on. So what I would like to do is I would like to work with our chair and vice chair to develop a formal request to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office in Carlsbad to request that they look at our plan as a priority. We've been in draft stage since 1997. We understand that they have other mandates and that they're reviewing other plans, but we feel as though they should give some priority to the plan that we're working on. And then in November, I'd like to come back also and ask if maybe we plan a trip to Sacramento and fine-tune the transition of some of those funds that they have for draft recovery plans to be funneled down to our office here in Carlsbad. And so then also, Matt attended the meetings with us, and he may have a comment in regards to how we did in DC. His thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. That was actually a really good trip out to DC, I have to say, for several reasons. One is, and like you'd said, this was sort of our first shot across the bow and introduction to, both our folks in the Congress, but also the agencies at the higher levels. And I got to say a couple of things. One was first, the staff that accompanied on the trip, outstanding job, really represented this agency exceptionally well. And had a great package of information. It was a seamless, discussion with all the members. I mean, they really did an outstanding job of representing the RCHCA. This, like I say, was sort of our first introduction to that, and I could see us really moving forward in, let's say, a more aggressive approach to really having our voice heard and working toward an ultimate delisting of the Stevens kangaroo rat. I think the positives of all of this is they now know we're there. They have a better understanding of what the issues are, and we're able to develop a better relationship and work from the top down in trying to accomplish some of this. I mentioned, too, that the trip will have a lot of follow-up. There's opportunities to work in Sacramento, to work with the state agencies, make sure that the message is being delivered appropriately. And then we'll be, I'll be back in DC in November and on sort of a different issue, but have offered to stay for an extra day to be able to continue that dialogue and make sure that they know every chance we get, that we're speaking to them and hopefully get some traction on the delisting. So anyway, kudos to all of those that joined us on the trip. It was an excellent opportunity and great representation.
Thank you. So I would answer any questions right now. If not, then we request to receive and file for that report.
No questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next item, again, you might as well just stay right there. Yeah. Report on educational and outreach programs.
Okay, so Princess Hester, ASO, for RCHCA, and this is a project that's really near and dear to my heart. It's that time again this year we are going to be celebrating our educational outreach programs. We have our annual Endangered Species Day activities coming up. And Endangered Species Day was originally celebrated in 2006, and it's held in May, but we hold our events in September and October so that we coincide with the school's calendars better. This is an event that started off. We had, I think, 30 students, Girl Scout troop that came out to Sycamore Canyon, and we did some educational projects with them there. And this year, I'm really happy to report, I'm probably going to have over 700 students this year to attend the event. We've expanded it to Lake Skinner. We have, we're going to utilize the schoolhouse. There's a historic schoolhouse at Lake Skinner. There's also, RCHCA owned lands down there. And we're hosting Western Center Academy. This is a school that we also do some research projects with MWD and also with the RCHCA. And the event is September 26th, that's Tuesday. You have a flyer in your packet. And we're at Lake Skinner on September 26th. The event runs from about 9 to 2 o'clock. There are 6th grade students, and there's 2 sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. But if you show up anytime between 9 and 2, you're guaranteed to see what goes on for these events. And on October 17th, 18th, and 19th, we will be at Sycamore Highland Park, partnering with the city of Riverside. And we have 4 schools that are coming on October 17th, 18th, and 19th, and you're welcome to attend any one of those days or all of them as well. We have an agency that we use that's called Wild Wonders. They're affiliated with the San Diego Zoo, so they come out and they do a live animal presentation for the kids, and then we also have our partners, our biologists. We have waste management with the county, and they're going to talk about composting with the students. So this is going to be a very exciting event, and like I said, I'm really happy to report that it's expanded. And with that, I put out a challenge to each of you because I would like my goal for next year to expand the event so that I have a school represented from every one of our jurisdictions. So right now, I have the city of Paris, Riverside, we have Harupa, I have Hemet, and so now I need to get, a school from each one of your areas, and we would love to host them. We pay for the transportation, and I think that there's no greater effort in expanding the word of conservation and teaching those that will come behind us on how to take care of the land and how to value our resources. And so I'll send you information that you can respond to and assist me with getting some additional schools on board for next year. So there are 6th grade students, and we do 5th or 6th grade, depending. Some elementary schools nowadays go up to 5th grade, so we'll take 5th grade. But we gear it towards the 5th and 6th grade. They are old enough to understand what we're presenting. We make sure that the curriculum fits the NGSS standards, which a lot of the schools are gravitating towards now. So we have meetings throughout the year. We participate with the educational collaborative in order to make sure that our lesson plans fit the criteria for what the teachers are presenting in the classroom today. And it's a well-rounded program. So after the event, we bring them out for the field trip. Once the field trip is concluded, then we provide art paper to the schools, and then the kids go back and they, draw their idea of what they experienced that day, and then they present their artwork, and then the teachers continue to build upon the lessons that we've presented to them throughout the school year, and at the end we're really able to see how that information has matriculated, and the kids really understand what they've experienced. So it turns out to be a very valuable event, and I appreciate your support with this. We wouldn't be able to do it without you.
So when we last spoke, you were trying to get Mr. Aguilar at Harvest Hill. Has he reached out to you yet?
He has not.
I will follow up again. He was supposed to get in touch with you last week about, you said the September trip is already kind of wrapped up, but for
right.
October, he was still available to get to.
I could, yes. I could definitely use him for October, okay. and if not this year, because sometimes it takes a vetting of the materials. And so what we do is we send the materials to the principal, to the teachers, so that they can take a look at it. And then even if we need to fine tune it, like let's say for that particular year, the school is going to focus on one component, recycle, reduce, reuse. We can cater our lesson plan to still meet those standards, but to have information that supports the teachers in the classroom. And that's really what it's all about. And so in making those two connections, one, the connection with transportation, that's usually one of the greatest expenses that schools have in participating in field trips. And the other is making sure that it's beneficial for the teacher. We want this information not to just be something fun, even though we present it in a fun way. We also want them to be able to utilize that as a foundation for what they're presenting in the classroom. And so we give the kids field guides, and we talk to them about hiking activities that they can do, because believe it or not, we have open space right here, in our urban communities that kids don't even know about, And so when we take them out there and you see their faces of being outdoors and, in the fresh air, and this area is right here in my neighborhood, it's right here in my community, it's very rewarding.
So how often are these?
So we hold them once a year, And I started off, like we started off and it was one day and we would be at Sycamore Canyon. And so now we've really expanded it. So we were able to work with our partners through Parks and Rec that manage the Lake Skinner Reserve. So now we're open down to Lake Skinner, which helps with some of the logistics, because if the school is closer to Skinner, then we're able to entertain them there. And then we've expanded it also here in the city of Riverside, where we're doing it 3 days. And Brian teases me all the time and says pretty soon we'll be running it a month, but we can do that too. So, we'll work with the schools and their calendars. And like I said, the biggest challenge is the transportation, but we're providing that. So next year, one from every jurisdiction would be great.
I would suggest you try to get your local schools involved if you can. This really is a valuable program. And if you have an opportunity to go yourself, even for part of one of the days, it is a really rewarding experience. The kids have a great time, and everybody who is there learns something. So, good event. I'm glad to see you expanding it, and I'll be there.
Great. Any other questions? All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list is a report on the reserve management and monitoring efforts by Mr. Shomo.
Good morning. My name is Brian Shomo, and for those that don't know, I'm the Natural Resources Manager for the agency. I help coordinate the on-the-ground management and monitoring within the 46,000-acre nature reserve system of the rchca. So if you have any questions regarding the management and monitoring, I'm probably the guy to see. Today, instead of boring you with multiple topics, I'm going to entertain you with one topic. So, and that topic's ThinkNet. So, is the presentation? Yeah, there you go. Basically, start with the background. It's a very invasive weed in our area, and it has a great potential to impact kangaroo rats detrimentally. We'll talk about our remote sensing and our mapping efforts, and we'll talk about our research and educational outreach. So basically, the background of it, it's about a 2-foot weed. It grows in our elevation. It has the ability to pretty much eliminate anything that grows within it or near it, which is what really makes it detrimental to the kangaroo rat. It pretty much will exclude any kind of native flowers around it, which is what the native kangaroo rat basically eats and feeds upon. So, completely covered our area with the low desert areas in clay, sandy, and gravelly soils, which pretty much covers our entire area. It came from central Arizona, but originally it came from South Africa. So we don't have any native predators of it, which makes it particularly hard to manage within California. It looks like this. A lot of folks think this is a beautiful native wildflower. You see it growing along our roadways. I live in northern Lake Elsinore. You see it up and down to 15. You see it on Lake Street. You see it now forming in Temecula. We actually have seen it now in Sycamore Canyon, which was surprising because it's basically an island within the middle of an urban environment. So we don't know really how it got there, but it's showing up on the east side near the warehouses. So in its low density form, it grows in and amongst the grasses. When it gets to a high density, a critical mass, it pretty much excludes everything. So we'll get into a little bit of that in a little bit here. I'm sorry? It's pretty, and it smells good. It's called clustered chamomile. A lot of people even use it for tea. We have neighbors growing it in their yard near Lake Matthews. Some of them use it for tea and drink it. So it smells delicious, it's pretty, and it is a noxious weed, though, so we need to take care of it. And why is it important to us is probably the question. Again, it prevents anything from growing near it, which limits the foraging capability of the Stevens kangaroo rat, which limits the nutritional diversity of the Stevens kangaroo rat. It would be like you eating iceberg lettuce all day. Sure, you could survive for a while, but you're probably going to lose weight. And the last thing you're going to do when you're starving is probably want to reproduce. So basically, the Stevens kangaroo rat doesn't reproduce. Populations obviously go down. You can see this at Lake Paris. We, in the recent past, have monitored there. Lake Paris now is a complete monoculture out to the San Jacinto Wildlife Area, where you don't see anything but stinknet. And we found in our monitoring that the body weights of Stevens kangaroo rat are about 10 to 15 grams lower than they are in other areas of our reserve system. We didn't see any reproductive potential. In other words, there were no lactating females, there were no pregnant females, which means their population was kind of at a stable point, but if we went back there this year, we'd probably see a decline in numbers. So what's the management implications? Again, it's very difficult to treat once it's established. You just have to drive out Cajalco near Lake Paris, you'll see it everywhere. Once it's to that level, I don't really know how you put that genie back into the bottle. So some of our reserves are just starting to see it on the periphery. But what makes it particularly hard, we tend to favor grazing because we can do it on such a large scale. I typically graze probably about 5,000 acres a year. But the animals, the sheep, don't eat it. And we think because it's such a strong smell and a strong taste, it would be like chewing on a chamomile tea bag, which I never have done it, but I don't think it would taste very well, that concentrated, so they ignore it. The other thing, we typically burn large areas of habitat for Stevens kangaroo rat, so native flowers come back. In this case, burning isn't effective either because our grass fires burn really quickly. We do them typically at the end of May. This thing is still green, so the fire burns right through it. It pretty much doesn't hurt it, and it continues to flower and set seed. Herbicides are effective. The problem we found with herbicides are most of our kangaroo rat reserves, if you noticed, are around drinking water reservoirs, so we have to be careful what herbicide we use. We have used Roundup, which is probably the least caustic type herbicide. You can buy it at Home Depot, homeowners use it and whatnot. The problem with herbicides are we don't see it until it's flowering. And once it's flowering, you spray it with Roundup, it takes about 2 weeks to be effective. So it continues to kind of set seed to ripen on the vine, even though the plant is dying, and then it still goes to seed by the time that herbicide is pretty much killing the plant. So the only way we've really found to be effective is hand pulling and weed whacking, which, as you can imagine, is quite labor intensive. It's quite expensive, therefore. So we have to find a new way of doing it, and we need to find new ways of identifying it before it's even in the flowering stage, which brings us to the next topic. How do we map it? Excuse me. How do we map it? Currently, we're mapping it by hand. We're walking through fields, we're driving along roads, and we're mapping it as we see it. This typically results in like data gaps where we're biased to where we're actually operating in or where we're driving in frequently. So oftentimes new weeds are overlooked, and their population becomes so large it's noticeable even from a great distance, and that's when we kind of go out there and we map it, we see it. Management at this point is usually containment and not eradication. So you can see that on our weed map. Most of those yellow dots are near roads, or when we do a different type of survey out in the middle of a field, which makes it problematic because we don't recognize everywhere. And so once one plant gets established out there, it can put out 10,000 seeds. Well, even if only 10% of those seeds germinate, that's still 1,000 plants. And at that point, it's almost like impossible to contain it or to eradicate it. So what we're proposing, what we've been experimenting with Harry's assistance, is to do a remote sensing. And historically, remote sensing was used either using freely available satellite imagery or aerial imagery. Satellite imagery was free, but the resolution wasn't fine enough to perform weed mapping on the scale that we needed. And aerial imagery is really expensive. So we started looking into drone technology, which was basically developed by the agricultural community to assist with crop production. Drones are relatively cheap to fly and only required a passage of written FAA test to fly commercially. So this is what we come up with. Basically, you go out there and use a handheld spectrometer to get a frequency of that particular weed. Each weed has its own frequency. Even though it's a different shade of green, there's a slight variation of green, even amongst a whole bunch of green things. So once you get that frequency, you can fly a spectral camera over it and then identify those individual plants based on their frequency values. As you can see here, each material out there, each material classification, whether that's soil, water, or vegetation, has its own combination of colors, which gives it a little bit different reflectance. And so we can identify that on a pixel level. And so you can pick out individual weeds in a field. And we're anticipating when we fly this drone, which you see here in the lower right corner, it's relatively inexpensive. It only costs about $65 for the drone itself, less than $500 fully equipped. This thing can do about in our experience, it can do about 500 acres an hour compared to the average guy. So we fly it, it's on autopilot. You can set a course on your iPad. It'll go out there and it'll fly and it'll map and it'll take those images. We then bring that camera back and the images are run through ArcGIS and individual pixels show up based on those frequencies. So then we can go out in that field and know, hey, there's a weed out here in the middle of this 500-acre field and we can go treat it before We have to see the population big enough and to be able to see it from binoculars or happen upon it. We want to drive those costs down even lower. So we're experimenting with ways to do that because a lot of land managers are managing 100 acres, 200 acres, 300 acres, not 15,000. So they need the cost down cheap enough, under $1,000, that they can go out and fly this thing monthly. So we can track weeds not only just during its flowering season, but in January when it's still a seedling, or in July when it's already kind of brown. We want to create a data library of the reflectivity values of specific weeds, priority weeds, priority meaning stinknet at this point, but also others in time. So here's a quick video, and we have to be aware that we are in a nature reserve.
Of drone for weed mapping purposes using spectral imagery on a fixed-wing drone. Electric, virtually silent.
So you can see it's a fixed wing, and the reason we picked a fixed wing versus a quadcopter. Quadcopters are great if you're filming movies and whatnot, but they go up, they stay there and whatnot. The fixed wing is very slow flying. It can get us the resolution. It can fly great distances and stay up in the air for about an hour versus a quadcopter, which has 4 more propellers, much louder, and it burns its battery through maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes most. So it doesn't stay up in the air as long. This can also carry a pretty substantial payload, and we're cognizant of the fact that we're in a nature reserve. So Fish and Wildlife Service and the CDFW, the regulatory agencies, we have to be aware that there are nesting birds that we could be disturbing. There are other environmental factors. So we needed something very quiet. I don't know if you ever heard of a quadcopter flying in your neighborhood. It sounds like a swarm of bees coming oftentimes. This is virtually silent. It only kicks the engine on when it has to pick up speed to maintain its altitude. So you hear it here, but then it'll stop and it'll glide and then it'll pick up again, which extends the battery life as well. We have to keep it above 250 feet, but below 500 feet. So we don't, there's other aircraft out there that have to have a 500-foot, ceiling or whatever. And so we have to be aware of a variety of things, and this fit the bill. So it took a while to experiment to find the proper equipment and everything, and the speed, the altitude to get the resolution we need, but we're consulting with the Army Corps of Engineers on how to do this. They recently flew to Temescal Valley and the Santa Ana River looking for a Rundodonnax giant reed. They use actual aircraft, but they're very interested in getting this drone technology to work to bring those costs down so other folks can help. They don't have to do a one-time effort with federal dollars to fly at one time. We could be doing this continually if we get the cost down to an agricultural level. So, the other component. First, we have to identify it, map it, find out where it is before we start managing it. And then the other thing is we have to develop tools to properly manage it once we do find it. And then we also have to have this educational outreach. Again, the public is growing it in their yards. I think some of our public works agencies don't really recognize it. So when they grade the shoulders of the road, it's just blasting the seed right down. Maybe we can ask them to time it differently or whatnot. But there is a whole educational component that comes along with it. We don't want to overburden anybody. But if we're going to put this thing back to a more manageable level, we're going to need a lot of help. This is on the same level as quagga mussel you might have heard of that kind of completely destroys lakes and water bodies around here. It's also, you might have heard of shot hole borer. It's affecting our avocados. Prices of avocados have gone through the roof if you can even find them. So the RCHCA coordinated a working group. We got folks together in a room that had a stakeholder interest in it, particularly U.S. Fish and Wildlife, CDFW, the Water District, and UCR. The focus of those groups were research to identify practical treatment options, figure out how this thing is traveling, and how it's affecting SKR. The public outreach component was up to MWD's PR department and U.S. Fish and Wildlife's PR department. So the research end of it is concentrating on 3 treatment areas all over western Riverside, so we get a kind of an idea of how our treatments react in different areas of western Riverside based on different climate regimes. It's much cooler and wetter down in Temecula versus up at Lake Matthews. So we want to have it spread out over the entire region. The project will occur over 3 years. We're proposing that the MWD will provide $28,699 of the total cost of $53,699, and the RCHCA cost would be about $25,000 out of the Lake Matthews endowment funds. The public outreach component. So we got hold of Native Plant Society. They're developing an app so the public can report where they see this. There's only a few sightings reported in Western Riverside, which is surprising since it's everywhere. So we need the public's help to report it. And there are folks to go out there and the flower watchers. You've seen them all over the 15 this year with super blooms. They travel all over looking for flowers. We're asking them to help identify it. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is their PR department, like I said, is coordinating with MWD. They're trying to make a nice, glossy, one-page informational flyer that we can put or hand to people, but also put on our websites and stuff. They came up with a nice little slogan: super blooms, boating, and guacamole. 3 things that make California great and are at risk from invasive. And again, they're tagging it at the same level as quagga mussel and shot hole boar, which lends credibility to the importance of this and controlling this. I recently attended with Harry an Orange County meeting. It's now on their radar. They just started seeing it in Orange County. They're very concerned about it. Their weed management group is now focusing on it. I just got word from the Cooperative Extension at UCR. San Diego has now formed a working group to take care of this weed as well. So we're hoping to coordinate our regional weed groups into one focused effort where everybody pulls their own weight, but at least we're all pulling the same direction to try to control this thing before it gets all over our wild areas. And so that's it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I think we have a request to speak by Mr. Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a great report. This is really a serious threat. But one thing you're talking about, say animals grazing won't do it. They specifically go out and get a group of goats, try goats. Goats will eat anything. I don't know. If they haven't tried goats, they haven't tried.
We haven't tried goats, and there was a reason we don't try goats. We typically use sheep. And that's where I bring out several bands of sheep.
Goats.
The problem with the goats is in the past we've had trouble containing them. They will eat everything and anything, and even our native flowers.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to do it on it. Maybe we can do it as a part of the experimental.
I'm training the goats again.
I haven't, but I've seen goats actually eat tamarisk trees. I mean, they'll eat and girdle the trees, and I'm sure they'll eat tin cans. They'll eat anything. So we could try, but. And typically in the past we haven't because they do eat everything
else too.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Representative from Riverside.
Goats will eat those dudes.
Thank you. Just a quick question. You mentioned body weight loss of 10 to 15 grams. On a body weight percentage basis, roughly what is that?
What are 60 grams? So it's about 20% loss of body weight.
Pretty significant.
It's pretty significant. So I mean, once they get down to that 50 gram, 45 gram level, they stop reproducing. They're almost in starvation mode. So they're just looking for food. And so they have a life cycle of about 3 to 5 years if they're lucky. And so what happens is you go out, year 1, year 2, year 3, and you're monitoring. And yeah, the population is pretty stable. You're finding 15 on a grade of, say, 25, and you're thinking it's pretty good. But what you're noticing is they're not, like I said, the females aren't pregnant. They're not lactating. There's no juveniles. So you go year 5, 6, and that population starts dropping. Well, if there's no reproduction, all those are going to be gone, and then it's going to be extirpated from that area. So we want to catch up before that. There are ways we can help improve the native seed bank. We can do some artificial seeding out there, some broadcast seeding to kind of stave it off. But in the long term, that's not practical. We need to get this thing back to a controllable level.
Yeah. Just one other thing that we might think about, there are training needs for the people who are in the fire camps. We may be able to get those crews once in a while. CAL FIRE occasionally has some crews available who need training. And several jurisdictions are trying to put together programs to offer employment to people who are or recently were homeless and want to get back into society. And that's an inexpensive, not free, but inexpensive potential labor force. Which would also have the benefit of beginning to train and employ people to get back into society. So those are ways we can look at potentially generating the personnel to do the work.
That's a great idea. And a certification, an herbicide applicator's license is not difficult to get. I mean, you need some training, you need to pass a test, but that's a marketable skill. You can go and get your pesticide permits and then pretty much open up your own business if you wanted to, if you had the right certifications. So, and they're just simple, well, I shouldn't say simple, but they're written tests and whatnot. So it's a good idea.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ingram.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just two questions. Are there any species now that have desire to eat this plant, or has it become part of their palate or diet that may impact?
Yeah, we haven't found any yet. Again, that's part of the research, is to study behavioral characteristics of some of the animals in this area. We don't even know. Maybe SKR aren't eating them. I suspect they are eating some of the seed. It's the only thing out there in the populations, but I don't think they're eating enough of it to control it. I don't see any native herbivores or anything that's grazing this stuff down.
So prior to eradicating the weed completely, are we going to be afforded the opportunity to see what may be grazing or feeding off that, so we're not killing off other species that we're trying to protect?
Absolutely. And so that's part of our grazing regime that we have in our area, in our reserves. And one we mostly control is Lake Matthews, Southwest Multi-Species Reserve, and Steel Peak Reserve out near Paris. And we graze based on native herbivore behavior, where we bring sheep out, but we don't graze it down to nothing. So we try to mimic what would typically have been native antelope behavior, where they move, they graze, and they keep moving because they're afraid predators are going to kill them. And so what we do, we work with our producer and our grazer, and we have that shepherd push them continuously across the land where they just graze the seed heads. And then once our native flowers start blooming in late spring, we pull them all back. And so we have done that this year. And again, I've watched them graze right around patches of stink nets, so they aren't eating it. I don't think our native animals are eating it, mule deer and whatnot. I haven't seen anything touch it, to be honest with you. That is part of the UCR research proposal, is to basically find out if there are any kind of practical management options. Grazing is one of them, because they'll be studying it while we graze, hopefully this spring. And they'll be observing our sheep and whatnot.
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished.
I know.
Right? It's interesting. I've seen it growing in the Santa Rosa Plateau, which we have close to. That's where one of the high schools will be trying to get, or the junior high there, to actually get them engaged, because I like that. I think that's a great idea. I think you did a great presentation. I would just be curious to see, and by the way, as a developer, we use goats all the time to clean big parcels of land, and they do train them with a wire that's electrified, so they know to stay in those parameters, so it can be done. And they do eat anything. I left my boots sitting on the back of the truck, and they eat them.
See, some of that, they will. And if we had a large, substantial patch, Lake Paris should consider that. And if it would, but the problem with state parks, I work with their natural resource manager to help them manage that SKR reserve for us. So far, Sacramento State Parks isn't willing to allow grazing animals to be put into Lake Paris State Park. So they have two treatment options, basically herbicide and fire. So this year we work with them to burn it, so they set a prescribed fire out there. We will see how effective it is. It seemed to leave a lot of it out there. So, you know, they're limited. And so that's where the herbicide would come in. So Lake Paris is one of the areas that we are proposing to have one of our research plots in. Ken Keetzer is the natural resource manager for state parks out there. He's very excited to have us have a research component in his park. So hopefully we'll help them find a way. But Lake Paris, I keep coming back to that. If you go through the SKR HCP, that is one of the key areas for KRAT populations. It's one of the largest populations. To see that blink out would be a huge loss to this reserve system. So we need to help them, and I think we will.
Thank you.
Mr. Leesmeyer.
Great presentation, Brian. One of the things you said about the Roundup, you said it was the least caustic.
Yeah.
We've actually in Menifee, we've had a group of residents banding together to stop the use of Roundup in the parks because of the glyphosate and the connections to cancer cells and things like that. You know, I'm just curious if this is something that we need to maybe look at, maybe using an alternative method for, especially for your treating it around the Lake Matthews area, and the runoff, you know, the runoff from all that's going to end up in Lake Matthews.
There's a few studies out there, and this is was very aware by the Orange County folks. There's many groups over there now, Laguna Beach and whatnot, that are, excuse me, anti-herbicides. And they have attached themselves to a couple studies that have shown that there are certain links in high doses of glyphosate application. If that tool was taken away, there is really no other cheap, cost-effective herbicide to land managers. So we don't know if there's a replacement for Roundup. Roundup is probably the cheapest. There are much more powerful herbicides. Those aren't necessarily approved for around drinking water reservoirs. If we lose glyphosate, to be honest, as a land manager, I don't know what we'll do. And that's where that educational component is going to have to come in. I know City of San Clemente recently had people come to their council meeting, and they were on basically, the council was ready to ban that herbicide until they started having a little bit more educational component from the herbicide community, like what this thing actually does. And as far as glyphosate is concerned, people have cell membranes in their body. Plants have cell walls. It's a whole different mechanism. Glyphosate typically in normal applications wouldn't affect people. Even in the MSDS, they don't even tell you to induce vomiting until you drink about a gallon of it. It just doesn't affect us in a way. Now, there are studies in very high doses in limited sample sizes that have shown a little bit of a connection. I'm not here to argue for the herbicide community. I just know as a land manager, my hands would be severely tied if that herbicide is taken away. We should look for an alternative. At this point, I don't know if there is an alternative. You know, Dow Chemical, we deal with the Dow Chemical representative and stuff, and that's about the least, like I said, the least, I won't say caustic, but the least harmful in a sense. It goes inert as soon as it hits the soil. It's only active, again, in plant walls, not in human membranes, but there is a few studies out there. So, I mean, they'll have a sign now, I think at like stores, retail stores, saying this product causes cancer, the same as they have on a 2x4. You know, so, I mean, to be honest, I mean, you walk in and there's in Home Depot and you'll see that this product causes cancer and it's on a piece of lumber. So I'm sure if I ingest enough of anything, to be honest with you, it's my opinion anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
Interestingly enough, my wife doesn't allow any type of pesticide or herbicide in our home around it. She's paranoid of it. And what had happened was I actually used Roundup, and it wound up, one of our chihuahuas that she had at the time consumed it, and it wound up killing it. Oh. So she was afraid of small creatures, other things, birds that may or may not eat them. Oddly enough, she found a concoction that you can actually use with baking soda and sugar that will kill ants, which I didn't know. But she uses dishwashing detergent with water to kill weeds, and it kills them very effectively. It creates a lot of clean spots on my decks, but they look odd, so I have to power wash everything. But it's very effective and it's cheap.
We use, like I said, liquid soap and water to kill insects. I've never heard of it killing plants, but we spray it to kill aphids at my house on roses and whatnot. There's also, I guess there are other people experimenting with acetic acid vinegar applications, which actually burn plants. It typically takes, I've heard, about 50 gallons per acre. Application. I don't know what that does to the acidity level in soils or your waterways. You know, I'm from back east. Acid mine runoff was a huge thing. Our rivers were orange from sulfur and acid mines. And so you start dumping, we manage thousands of acres. You start putting thousands of gallons of acid out there. I don't know what that effect would have. But what I'm trying to get at is everything has an effect. And there has to be more studies. And I hate to have people make just gut reactions on one or two studies with small sample sizes. It needs to be researched more. It's probably the gist of it.
I think Mr. Leismeyer's got a really good point, though, because these are small creatures, and if this has this type of an impact on a human being that may weigh 150 to 200 pounds, that's pretty something that they pass.
Yeah. Well, so far, we've applied herbicide over hundreds of acres, and we haven't seen any difference in population levels of SKR. In our monitoring. So we have used it across landscape level scales, and boom sprayers and whatnot. We have not seen any detrimental effects to kangaroo rats or their populations at this point. So, but again, we're using ounces to 60 gallons. We're not dumping concentrate on it. So if you apply it right in the right concentration, in the right application rate, there probably is little effect, as studies have shown.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, City of Paris.
Thank you. Good report, Brian. Obviously, this just didn't happen overnight. I have, because I've only been here for this year so far in the agency. So, is this an annual report that's always given, or
no?
So that's my question. Is this just didn't happen overnight, and yet we're talking about getting off the endangered list, this is definitely going to endanger this species. And exactly, that's what baffles me here, sitting here listening to this report. And meantime, I mean, for me in Paris and Lake Paris, I thought that was a beautiful plant. And now I'm learning a lot more. But I'm just, as a member of this agency now, and just thinking that this is something must be coming to us every year or not, and if not, and it's not, now that I'm hearing that, is we should.
Why haven't we recognized
Why
it
have
earlier?
not we been working on this a while ago already?
And I have I have somewhat of an answer for you, and it's probably not a good answer. It was first discovered at Lake Paris in the 1980s, mid-80s. I think it was 85 or 86. So it's been there for quite some time. What we've noticed is the population, it doesn't do a whole lot for years. It just kind of slowly increased. You started seeing it more and more and more. And then it reached a critical mass, and it exploded at Lake Paris. And then we didn't really see it for years during the drought, 5 years. We didn't really see it. I didn't think it was much of a problem. And then all of a sudden this year, the seeds must have laid latent in the soil, in the soil bank. And we don't know how long they persist, but that'll be part of the greenhouse studies, is how big is that seed bank in the soil. So we're going to grow them out in greenhouses and see how much is in there. But the problem is it kind of builds up, and you can see it amongst the grass. It didn't really become a problem. And then all of a sudden the population increased exponentially this year, which was alarming, because we've seen it pop up in places we've never seen it before, and in densities we've never seen it before. And the real problem now is because each of those plants weren't treated this year, so you had not one plant, you had 10,000 plants. Each plant puts out 10,000 seeds. And so we get another rain year like we did, it'll be huge. And so why didn't we take action earlier? I hate to say it, because it wasn't a priority when it was at a certain low level. And that's how weeds always are. You wonder how Arundodonax got, all through to Santa Ana. Why didn't we take care of it when it was one or two plants? It doesn't get the attention until something is a problem. And unfortunately, that's not a good excuse, but that's reality. We had funding available for other things that were more of a priority. Until it reached a critical level, it became a priority at that point. And now we're stuck putting it back in. And I think one of the reasons we were so interested in getting Harry and his expertise with electronics and GIS mapping and everything is because of this. We realize that that's the wrong approach to management, as you've seen in my presentation. We need to be able to map it and map 1,000, 10,000 acres and identify it before it becomes a problem. So I can send a guy out there and spray this one or two weeds out in the middle of a 500-acre field where we wouldn't notice it before. And so future weeds hopefully will be taken care of a little bit better. But that's
I appreciate your honesty, and I just think, we just need to be more on the reactive side than proactive, especially, like I said, being new in the agency myself, and I'm just concerned about we're trying to get off the endangered list, and so therefore we need to be reactive and not proactive.
Correct.
Or am I saying that reverse? We need to be proactive, not reactive.
And that's what we're trying. We're trying, to be honest.
Right.
And again, some of it has to do with other organizations' rules and mandates. Like I said, what would commonly, I would take care of it at Lake Matthews, they weren't able to take care of it in the same manner at state parks.
All right.
And so they have limited tools, and we need to give them more tools available to help them. And so that's what we're kind of doing. And to be honest, we thought it was just contained out there. We didn't see it in any high densities anywhere else. And then it was surprising how much it came in. That first picture on that first very title slide, that's Lake Matthews. And so the difficult thing about that is it's outside the reserve. It's within the operations of Metropolitan Water District. I'm not allowed to go in there. So, because it's next to the water. So now we have to educate Metropolitan Water District's operational folks to help treat that. Otherwise, there's this huge seed pool right next to the reserve that we, as the reserve managers, can't touch. So that's why I said there has to be agency coordination. You can't have this huge pile of seed just ready to burst into the reserve, and we continually manage it over and over and over and over and forever. We have to get the tools that are suitable for, like, Metropolitan Water District to go around their drinking water reservoir. They control Tamarisk. They're allowed to use certain herbicides. Roundup is one of them. near our drinking water reservoirs. And they do treat certain weeds there. We have to get this on their radar now and have them coordinated. But we can't do it all for everybody. So it's going to be an educational problem.
Great. Let's see, Wildemar.
I was just going to say the effectiveness of a goat is the effectiveness. Sheep I've raised both, and I have goats right now. They mowed our hill like nothing. So the first rain comes, all your mud's in your backyard, which it did at our house. But sheep, typically, they don't raise their head. So when I had my orchard, you could let your sheep out amongst the orchard. They'd eat everything down, but they only graze. They do not raise their heads up there, the laziest animals. And goats, they'll tear every tree up in the area. But they like anything that's high because they don't want to reach down on the ground. So you see the goats or the sheep that won't touch it. That's why they won't touch it. They will graze around the bottom of it, but they will never eat the stalk itself. Right. But you put a goat out there, and they'll mow it because they don't want to reach down and grab anything off the ground. So that's going to be one of probably your easiest ways to manage it. And if they can put some kind of a fencing and move them quickly so they don't go any farther down.
That'll be that's always been inherent the problem with the goats is that they eat everything. And we have noticed that when we first started grazing out there with sheep, we did notice they were lazy, like you said. They just want to stay in one spot, get fat, and keep eating.
That's it.
And that's where we had to force them to keep moving. That's what he continuously moves them. He kind of gets tired of me, but we've made a deal. He gets to graze out there, but he has to graze in a certain manner that's for us, and we called it targeted grazing. So he's targeting something, but he's also getting his sheep fattened up and good free range grazing. Goats, we have had other land managers use it. They've been difficult to stop at that point. They just mow down everything, and so I really do hesitate to use that goat unless it's because these aren't just one or two little patches where I can fence an acre in. It's across a landscape. And so to just let them kind of free range it out there or to keep moving that electric fence around, I don't know. We could try it. I mean, we can try it. I'm not saying, we could try it, certainly. My producer with the sheep is out of Paris, and Pedro Indicochea. And he's a great guy to work with. He has goats. He typically uses them in the middle of highways. Yeah, and so he'd be happy to bring them out. I mean, I could do a small scale and then report back.
Yeah, it really is that easy because... Yeah, I saw that. I saw the day they were out there. They mowed that thing clear.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
I have goats in my pens, and they won't even eat the weeds because that's how lazy they are. Yeah. You don't feed them for a couple of days. They'll mow it to the ground, which they did. Yeah. But that's what it is. Goats are definitely for anything about 4 inches to 6 inches off the ground. That's their territory. Yeah. They do not want to reach down and pick it off the ground. And a sheep will just graze everything to death. Yeah. But nothing tall. So
exactly. So that's what we noticed. They won't touch the mustard either. I mean, because their mustard is this tall, and they just keep walking right through it. We can definitely try the goats. I'm interested in trying different methods. Certainly our producer has them. We can try it out there. We haven't in the past because there has been some hesitation because they will eat everything. So we'll look into it. I'll report back this spring. You know how it goes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue, this is receive and file. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Next item is a report from Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one thing to report. We're about a year and a half into this management services arrangement that we have with the county and rchca. And for those of you that are newer to the board, about a year and a half ago when the full-time executive director of the rchca retired, members of the rchca board approached WRCOG and the county and indicated that, since the rchca is largely in a monitoring and management mode, that perhaps there wasn't the need for a full-time executive director, and thus perhaps there could be an opportunity for a management services contract to be put in place with WRCOG so you could achieve some cost efficiencies. And I think I had the opportunity to meet with Juan Perez just a few weeks ago to review how things have been going along, and I think Juan as well as myself, believe that the cost efficiencies certainly that this board anticipated through this arrangement have been achieved, and I think we've been able to also move ahead on a few new initiatives as well, such as the delisting. We've been able to hire Harry, so we've been able to put some resources, additional resources into the biology and the monitoring of the lands, and that's helped. One thing that, the reason I bring this up is that we both agreed, both Juan and I agreed, that we need to revisit the contract or the management services agreement that's in place, because there are some unanticipated aspects of the contract that have sort of hampered some of our cost efficiencies. And just one, for example, is that the contract, the way it reads right now, could be interpreted that if Princess wants to go out and hire temporary assistants for the events that she talked about earlier, that hiring would require approval by the Board of Supervisors. And so we want to kind of relook at the agreement now that we have a year and a half of experience under our belts, and probably bring something back to you and the county that you could take a look at that we think will, be in the spirit of what the intentions were. Make things even easier and maybe achieve some more cost efficiency. So probably at the next meeting, you'll see a revised management services contract that hopefully will achieve those objectives.
Great. All right. Anything else? No. Okay. Items for future agendas. Anybody have anything they'd like to? Mr. Ingram.
I think after listening to Brian and I have had this conversation before in regard to dealing with outside agencies. Everybody's in their own silo, so nobody knows what's going on. At some point, I think it would be beneficial to bring back a report or a suggestion from staff on how we can create some policies on how to address this so that you're not chasing your tail all the time when you have this type of situation. And it seems that if we're all addressing the same issue, there should be some policy that's current that would be applicable to this, rather than dealing in that silo mentality that we've discussed before, where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Because it seems that takes a long time to achieve when you have to go to Fish and Game or somebody else. And I'm not quite sure why their policy would be so much more extreme than ours. And it may be well worth, trying to get some synergy there to make this move a little quicker. And it may be something that you can explore and bring back to us at a future meeting. Right. I think, when I had this discussion when I was in D.C. as well, is if you change an HPP or you're trying to move the plan, and I think Marion knows this as well, that we're kind of governing by guillotine, because the big threat is you're going to lose your permit, right? So at some point, we have to have the ability, when you have this type of situation, to move on it and move quickly, because when it rained, would have been the opportune time. And now we're coming up with October, we're going to have rain again, and we know that if there's any seeds that have flown, this is going to get them sown for sure. So it's something that I think that we need to move on to sooner than later on trying to eradicate this, because we got rain coming, there is no doubt.
We have within each reserve cooperative management agreement, the document basically identifies each party's responsibility. Very general terms, though, and I like the idea of maybe firming that up, because in a policy that can be adopted by various people.
Yeah, and actually have some time frames that are assigned to it, so that when you have something that's this dramatic and you know that you're coming into another rainy season, that once they've been notified, that they have a window in which this has to be achieved, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. It's a worthy goal. I don't know how acceptable Dave will be able to, I'm happy to introduce it to him.
Okay.
Because, again, everybody, like you said, has this silo mentality, and it's this castle mentality.
Yep.
It's my castle, I want to do what I want to do in it. And to try to get everybody to agree to allow a collaborative or a blanket policy that I like the idea of everybody working together to resolve a problem.
Well, and there's a substantial cost associated to it, so I would like to, impress on them that what we're trying to do is not only save money, but save the species that we spent many years protecting now to get it to this goal, to even be able to delist it. The next portion on that, I'd like at some point we had a discussion about the San Diego Water Authority and what its impact has had on SKR. And at some point, I'd like to have some type of report on that to find out, in that region, why they haven't been able to accomplish what they need, because I've heard on multiple occasions that that's been a part of the problem with getting the delisting completed. They weren't able to ascertain their inventory on what they needed for reserve, and so I'm curious as if that is correct or not.
To the extent that they don't know what to acquire, that would be correct. They haven't had the monitoring ability to go out and say, okay, this is good kangaroo rat habitat, this is bad kangaroo rat habitat, we need to buy this or to acquire it. That kind of dovetails into what the RCHCA and Fish and Wildlife and Princess have been working on, Habitat Suitability Index, which would identify these areas in Southern California that are high priority targets for SKR acquisition. It's rich habitat.
Right. Well, I guess my question is why are we paying for the sins of San Diego County?
No.
With all due respect, I mean, we've worked very hard on this program, and I would like to see it go into the management phase. And it's frustrating that I hear that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and we're one of the most successful programs in the history of the state, bar none.
So if I could speak?
Certainly.
So it's not that San Diego is not doing what they're supposed to do. It's just that San Diego is very young in their recovery efforts for SKR. When you take a look at our agency, we've been around for almost 30 years now, working towards the same effort. And San Diego is just now adopting their NCCP. And so to answer your question, that's exactly something that we'll be working on. We approved the habitat suitability model. We're putting out a request for proposal in the next week or so. And that's something that we'll be bringing back to you as part of our report for our SKR efforts in
That's awesome.
November.
So the one question I have, though, is if they don't accomplish what they need to do, how does that impact Riverside County and our program?
So that's sort of the million-dollar question. And what we will be working on with our partners at Fish and Wildlife as we continue building our relationships and having these meetings is to identify in what areas could they look at Western Riverside separately, potentially from San Diego?
Thank you.
Which is one question. Or if in the event that we are connected together through our recovery efforts, then how can we, in that collaborative manner that you spoke of, how can we now share our best practices and help San Diego to achieve some of the efforts that we've done? And if we've established that they're in a mode of which they are recovering SKR, maybe that's substantial enough for us to be able to move forward. So that's like the million-dollar question, and that's what we're working on through these recovery meetings with Fish and Wildlife.
Fantastic, because when I alluded to the Water Authority, the question was, is there are lands that need to be acquired close to wetlands, wildlife, and other areas that they're using for mitigation, and that has been the issue. So I'm just concerned that we're doing all of this, and at some point, we're going to have to sit and wait till San Diego accomplishes what they want. If I had my druthers, I'd be more than willing to assist San Diego, but I take the Riverside comes first. I don't know how to say it other than that.
I think this will also help Riverside acquire. We're not done acquiring for SKR habitat. So the SKR is also a listed species under the Western Riverside MSHCP, which continues to acquire habitat for SKR and other grassland species. So this Habitat Suitability Index would also help Riverside County identify their acquisitions going forward to complete the acquisition of SKR habitat in Western Riverside. So we're singling out San Diego in a sense, but SKR is also an MSHCP covered species. So
I'm aware of that. I'm vice chairman.
So
the chairman's here. My question is,
we're not done
how do we come to a conclusion?
Right.
When do we know that it's been concluded and that we'll be able to delist it?
Well, and I think that's part of the conversation that we had in D.C. is that's why we need, and I think this conversation here is really important because that focuses us on the idea that we need an approved recovery plan, because part of the issue is if you never have an approved plan, or if every time we speak with agencies and you know the state or federal, they'll push the goalposts out, right? So we need a clear identification of what our goal is on recovery, and then everything that you're talking about with regard to invasive species or long-term management, just because the species is downlisted or delisted doesn't mean you just walk away completely. There's still that maintenance phase.
Absolutely.
And so all of this that you're talking about with, the drones and so forth and eradication programs, that's all going to be part of that. But until we have, an approved recovery plan, we're chasing our tail on this. And I think that's probably, if we could bring that back as an agenda item and really have a more aggressive approach toward finalizing that document.
Yes, that's what we're working on.
And with respect to, we had discussed last year the Nexus study. Mr. Director, how close are we to finding out where we sat with that? We had discussed that last year.
You're talking about with respect to the Nexus
For
study?
the Nexus study and for the endowments and the other things,
Yeah,
so that we
yeah,
can start taking a long-term perspective.
Yeah, we'll bring back a report on that as well. We've been talking with legal counsel on all that, but it's timely. The interesting thing about the Nexus study is that the the RCHCA was formed at a time that was pre-current Nexus study law, and so that's the kind of the tangle that we need to kind of work through.
Well, I just want to make sure once we've achieved the goal that we actually have the money through the streams in which to manage the program.
Another $1 million question.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. You guys did a fabulous job, and I appreciate you answering all the questions. Thank you, Brian.
Great. All right. Any other items for future agenda? All right. Seeing none, general announcements from any of the members? Nothing. All right. Well, then, our next board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, November 16th, same time and place. And we're going to adjourn the meeting for the day. Thanks so much for your time.